Well, I had to get a shot of this. It's the dam that I built. Created this little pond. Well, the pond is frozen over with beautiful, just square ice. I've got to dig out my skates and just do some pirouettes. Oh, this is gorgeous. Jewel, come here. Oh, you don't get ice like this very often before it all melts away. Jewel, come here. This is what I'm doing at the moment. I am putting up framework for the upper kitchen cabinets. The reason I'm doing this is I have to run some plumbing pipes that are going to be embedded inside the cabinets. I don't want any pipes inside walls. I want them the least chance of ever freezing. So I had to put up at least a framework. I'm not going to do the entire cabinet yet, but and how I'm doing this is I'm building the frame built right into the wood structure, so they're attached to the floor joists rather than the traditional. Most cabinets tend to be very poorly made. You know, they're all particle board, thin veneers, and then you screw them to studs in the wall. These cabinets are built to hold whatever weight I want to put in them. A couple of things to keep in mind when you're building something like this is I've ripped the 2x4s in half, and that's what the framing is, all half 2x4s. And when you're screwing these together, you have to keep in mind, like here, this bottom piece I built separately, and it's all squared, and then it'll attach to these pieces that are hanging from the ceilings. And these bottom pieces are screwed in with these 3 screws, and you have to avoid other screws. So when I built the bottom frame, these short pieces are attached to the longer pieces with these 2 screws, and they are put in the center so that when it's attached to the upper pieces that are hanging from the floor joists, the screws are on the outside of these screws that are already there. That's why, and I put 3 because it's hanging. I wanted extra support, so there's 3 screws in all the corners. So this is where the refrigerator is going to go, underneath there. And then I also have to build, because the plumbing pipes are going to come in through that opening there from the utility room. They're going to come down along this pipe, this vent pipe, and there's going to be a wooden frame built around this with tile. I'll probably have a narrow door on the front that you could open if you need to get access to it. And I don't imagine why I would, but and then the pipes will come down underneath and go to the sink and the dishwasher. And Then I've got to put up the same framework over this counter section here, the upper cabinets. So that's what I'm doing, and I've got to get back to it. Alrighty, update on the upper kitchen cabinet construction. This side, the frame is all done, and I've been working on the framing of this side, and I'm almost to the end point of this job. I just wanted to show a little detail of how I'm doing it. These pieces here will go up near the top, and let me climb up the ladder here. That's what that piece behind there, I just inserted it. I put these pieces in before I hung these down pieces in the front, and each one of these had to be plumbed and leveled, very carefully measured. Before, I've mentioned, when you're working with rough cut lumber especially, nothing is the same. You have to measure every single piece. And so these top supports are attached to this back piece, and then they're attached to each one of these uprights. And so they had to be screwed in from the back side. So I put this up so that I could measure between here and each one of these. And each one of these vary anywhere from 10.5 inches to 10 7/16 inches. And again, because you're dealing with, this lumber is finished lumber, but it's still, the outside sanded edges of finished lumber. You still will have high spots and low spots, so you got to measure every piece if you want it to fit exactly. So I measured and then cut all the pieces, and then I screw them in through the back, and then I just slide the whole piece back in place, and then screw it back in place again, and then I will measure where holes need to be drilled, a couple of holes that will go into these cross pieces, and line everything up and then screw them in place. And these pieces on the bottom here are just temporary brace material. It's how I held these pieces plumb in order to screw them up through the top. And there's a hole underneath. You can see where it's right there. So there's one screw just holding it in place so it's plumb and level. And then that's all coming off. And then the last thing I have to do, well, I finished the framework on the upper cabinets. My battery ran out the other day, so as I was filming, that's what I got cut off. I just finished putting in these two corner pieces here, and then all the upper braces are done. All of these braces here, they had to go last because everything else had to be put in place first. And I've got an idea of what I was planning to put. Of course, tile splash guard along the edge, and then tile on the top of the countertops. And then underneath I was going to have LED lights shining down on the countertop. And then I've got an idea. What I think I might do is put some white plastic material on the bottom, and then put the lights The LED lights will plug into this outlet, and I was going to have a switch wired up that I could get to, and then so the lights will be inside here, and then on top of this, I'll use the same kind of plastic material as the first layer of the shelf. So the lights will be in between, and I can turn on lights in the cabinet itself and shining down below on the countertop, and all the lights will be hidden, and they'll have access if I need to replace them by just lifting up this shelf, the bottom shelf of the inside of the cabinet, and I'll just drill holes through all these center braces to run the wires through. It's one of those ideas I sort of came up with as I'm going along. So the next project now, I've got both sets of upper cabinets framed up, is I got to start on insulating the upstairs ceiling and putting up sheetrock. All of these ceilings in here and upstairs. There's a lot of ceilings to do, and there's lots of sheetrock, piles of it. And then the insulation, I have several piles of foam insulation, which will have to be split into sections that will fit in between those ceiling rafters. All right, so I'm ready for some dinner, so I'm going in. And I'm not going to say back to work today. I'm going to say back to eating. All right. All right, what I'm working on now is insulating the ceiling. There's 3 roof angles, this one, that one, and then that one in this house, and it is a major job because the way the house is designed, the roof is all shed roof, which I mean there's no attic above the roof line in between the inside ceiling and the roof. And in order to insulate a roof like this, it's important to have an airflow just below the roof sheathing or the boards or whatever you use, plywood. And then below and above each roof line, there are soffit vents which allow air to flow in and out so that a flow of cool air continually flows beneath the outside roof. That way, any heat from inside can be vented out. The way this roof line works, there's soffit vents down below, and then up above I have holes drilled, and then there's an outside, which you can't see now because I've got the insulation up, that goes out to the eaves, because this roof butts up against this wall on the inside, so it has to vent out this way. And then around each one of the skylights, because the skylight blocks the channel between the roof rafters, I've drilled holes here and here, and then at the foot of each skylight the same thing. That way air can circulate in and out and still flow up and out. So in order to leave that air channel, the way I designed it is I'm using this foam board insulation, And I've measured and I've drawn lines on the inside of these roof rafters, you can see there. And then I put nails in every so often on the top line. And then I measure the distance, and because these are rough cut, nothing is exact, so you can't set everything up like a machine shop and cut everything to the same dimensions. And I had to invent a couple of new tools and jigs, which I can show you later. But anyway, once I get the right dimensions and I cut the foam, I put it in place and I angle it up one side, and then I take a strip of wood and the hammer and then I pound it up so it fits very tightly. And then when it hits the top nails, it stops. And then I put nails in the bottom so it doesn't move in different spots. The hard part with this is there's a lot of angle cuts on the foam, like these pieces here, down below there. Those have to be cut at a certain angle to match the roof, and then these pieces sit on top of that, and then some glue is put down so it holds everything in place. And then once all the foam is in, I'm putting in 4-inch fiberglass insulation with a backing. And then over that, I am putting up a vapor barrier. Even though the fiberglass has a vapor barrier, I'm putting an additional, it's like a plastic sheathing with a mirror finish to it. So it reflects any inside heat back into the room. Because I have such a small area, depth on these roof rafters, I have to put as much insulation as I can without restricting the airflow. That's why I'm not doing spray foam. I've heard so many bad things about spray foam, the waste, and it encases all your electrical wires, and I don't know, I just don't like the idea of it. So this is the system I came up with. Okay, this is the jig that I came up with to measure in between the roof rafters. It's just basically 2 flat pieces, and then I hold it up in place in between, and then I can slide it back and forth and then clamp it in place once I get the measurement. So I'll measure one end, and then whatever the length of the foam board, I'll measure up above here. This is kind of an awkward angle, but so I basically have 2 measurements, and then I cut the board according to that. And then these pieces that will fit in here, that's what those pieces are over there. They are cut on my table saw, and I can show you how I do that. All right, this is the setup with my table saw for cutting the foam. I put together sort of a sneeze guard for my saw because of all the dust kicking up from cutting this foam. I do wear a mask, but still a lot of this dust gets flown right in my face. So I set this up so that I can work behind it without getting as much dust in the face. And as I'm cutting, the stuff is really lightweight, so I came up with another little jig that I run the saw through until it's made the cut just past the blade, and then I shut it off. I put this in place, tape it down, that way it doesn't vibrate or stick together, the cut piece and then the rest of it. And then I have this pushing tool. This was a tool that I had to cut down the width, and then I put sandpaper on the bottom so that I can hold it in place and then push it along as I'm cutting it. So that's how that works. And I've got to get back to work. My Lord, look at that. I hope I'm not ruining my recorder. Oh, that's beautiful. Oh, look at that. Honey, isn't that amazing? I think that's Jupiter over there in the sky.
Over there?
Okay, I want to look at this myself here. Oh, this is so beautiful. I can't believe. Jewel, where are you? Oh, it's coming back. Oh my God. That was spectacular. Listen to the birds.
Yeah.
They think it's morning. Oh, that was amazing. Yeah, all the morning birds are singing.
So
An update on the ceiling insulation job. This is very time consuming, but what I am doing, I've probably said this already, but I'm putting in this foam insulation and leaving a gap so that the air gap works as insulation plus it allows air from the soffit vents to circulate, so it removes hot air that could rise up through the roof and then cause ice and ice dams. So it keeps the roof cooler. And the way I'm doing this is I have these measuring sticks that I put in place and then draw a pencil line, and that's the top line where the insulation will go. And then the second one I put up goes down to the bottom line, and that's the bottom of the insulation. That way I have a line, I know where to put nails, and I place a few nails on the top line, so when the foam is pushed up in place it won't go too far. And this is my measuring device. It's two pieces of wood with a clamp, and I can place that in between and then adjust it so I know, and then I'll measure what the width is, because none of these measurements, they're all rough cut lumber, of course, and you can't just cut everything and have it all fit. So you've got to measure each time you do it. And the bottom end of the foam sheet that you're putting in may be a little wider or narrower than the top end, so you have to measure 3 different places before you cut the foam. And then it fits very tight, and the foam, I tap it in place with a piece of wood and the hammer until it reaches the nails. And I put glue on the ends, and when I push it up in place I leave a little gap, like a ½ an inch or so, and then I pound it from the other end with the stick and the hammer so it slides down up against the glue, and then I tape the joints so they're good and airtight. But the insulation property of this gap is amazing. It's like insulated glass. You know, you have 2 layers of glass with air gap in between, and that's acts as insulation. And this is the same idea. Because I don't have an attic, the ceiling has to be insulated in a way that is efficient. So once the foam is all in place, then I'm putting up fiberglass batten, and then there's going to be a like silvery metal vapor, metal looking plastic vapor barrier, and that will reflect heat from the inside, and then the sheetrock will go up. So it's a mini stage project. But it is coming along. When I get this section done, then I've got that section and then that section to do. And you have to work around wires and pipes, and so sometimes it's time consuming, just the measuring and cutting and fitting around things. But another thing I wanted to show is there's a couple of ceiling lights. This wire here, I just drilled a hole in the foam. I had to measure so I knew where it was going to go, and then poked the wire through before I pushed the foam up in place. All right, now it's time to get back to it. Getting kind of warm up here today. It's in the 60s. Most of the snow is gone. Well, spring is coming. All right, back to work. Okay, update on the roof insulation project. This roof section, I've got all the rigid foam in place, and I'm just doing some detailing up here. Where this roof meets this wall section, the rigid foam has I've got a piece here that's on the back side of this beam, and so I need to insert some insulation in that little gap, and then above it, this is the metal roofing, and I am insulating. I had to spray foam inside any little gaps to the outside, and then I'm putting in rock wool insulation, and then this fiberglass insulation, and then this whole area I'm putting in pieces. I cut out pieces like this to cover that up, and then when I get all that finished, I'm going to move on to this section of the ceiling and do the same thing. And once I get all the rigid foam in, then I go back with fiberglass batting, and that'll be stapled. And then above the rigid foam, of course, there's an air gap like 4 inches, and it vents from the bottom to the top. Because there's no attic, I have to design these ceilings in a way so that the insulation is maximized. And on top of the fiberglass batting, there's going to be a vapor barrier. It's a plastic with a mirrored finish, so it reflects heat back into the room. That's going to be just on the ceiling. And then sheetrock. Okay, back to it. Now, I am still working on the rigid foam insulation in the ceiling. It's a very slow and long process. I'm on this second section now, This is the largest ceiling to do. And one of the things that takes extra time is when you have to fit around certain things. Like I have two vents. All right, let's try this again. My battery died earlier. I am still working on the rigid foam insulation. It's very slow process because there's a lot of measuring and fitting and piecing together. And then things like this really take up some time. This is one of the air vents, exhaust fans that are installed. So if it gets too hot on the second floor near the ceiling, I can vent outside. And there's also one that's over near the bathroom area. And because the walls they're designed, they're not going to go all the way up to the ceiling. Any steam, moisture from the bathroom will come up over the walls, and then there's another vent down there that's going to exhaust it to the outside. But anyways, installing these is even more time consuming because this vent pipe is just large enough so that you can't put the foam section in and have enough room above it for the width of the pipe and below it for the width of the pipe. So I had to put a piece that was lower than I normally do. I normally leave, a few inches for the air track above. So I put a piece that's lower, so the pipe comes down from where it goes out to the outside. And then I had to cut an angle because if I brought it straight through the foam, there isn't enough room underneath for the width of the pipe. So I had to put a piece that's higher than this piece, and it's resting on top of it so that it gives more room below, because the sheetrock is going to come right up to the bottom of this. And then the rest of the way down, I've got the lines drawn. It's going to go just below the level of this piece, continue down through the rest of the channel. So it's just a lot of confusing measuring and thinking. This is the kind of thing you can't do without checking several times before you make a cut. And then I've got to finish wiring this into the fan. But those are the kind of things that really take even more time. And I've got one more to do after this. And then I'm also got, get down this ladder without falling. I've got to do several piecing jobs around the exhaust stack that's in the ceiling also. So the foam is going to fit around that and still leave the airspace above. And the whole idea of the airspace is because the ceiling, there's no attic, and the ceiling is a certain depth, I want to get the most insulation I can. And putting in the foam insulation, the rigid foam, and leaving the air gap, it works kind of like insulated glass windows. They have a couple of panes of glass that are sandwiched with air in between. Usually it's argon gas or something, but but there's an air space in between. And that's insulating. And so once I get all the foam installed, then I got to go back with regular rolls of insulation, the fiberglass insulation. I've got some, this stuff here. And there's room enough for a 4-inch. And then on top of that, when that's put in, then I've got a metallic plastic vapor barrier that's going to go over it, so it reflects heat back into the room, so that helps with the insulating of the ceilings. So that's it for now. Still have a ways to go, and then that other ceiling over the master bedroom. So I need to get back to work. All right, a little bit more on these exhaust fans. This one is all done, wired up, all in place. And I'm working on the second one. I just wanted to show, let me zoom back out here. This is a piece of foam that's going onto the second. Oops. There we go. And in order to fit around the exhaust pipe, I had to do some fancy cutting at angles, and so it was a lot of measuring. This one is going to fit up here, up over that piece. Of tubing. But I just wanted to show how the thing I've used to cut this foam that seems to work the best is this, because it's got a flexible blade, so it can cut around corners and at angles. So that's what I am finishing up here. These are the two most time-consuming spots of this whole ceiling insulation job. All right, back to work. Okay, I'm just finishing up this section of the rigid foam insulation. This has been probably the most difficult part of this whole process. It has to fit over that exhaust pipe, the vent stack. So it involves a lot of measuring and special cuts, and the last thing I'm doing now is just putting the last piece of foam over the pipe, and then it'll all be filled in with fiberglass batt insulation. But the worst part were putting that by that pipe, and then around these exhaust vents there and over there. And the most time consuming. So the rest of it is just straight work like I've been doing the rest of it. So it should go faster. But I need to get back to it.